get to Syria with you, Adrian. We hear Kofi Annan with another plan, a new plan, which President Assad has apparently signed on to. And guess what? It includes letting Iran have a say in the outcome here. Should we just look at Kofi Annan and say, dude, it didn't work the first time, your ceasefire plan. This one doesn't have much more of a chance because it's President Assad controlling what happens next. Or do we take the Kofi Annan plan seriously?
I'd love to live in a world where I wouldn't have to hear his name anymore, where he just kind of quietly retires and works on foundations. I mean, whenever he comes in, he tends to bring everybody to the table equally, regardless of who's the aggressor and who's the victim.
Good point.
And that's the challenge. He's saying everyone needs a say. Why does Iran need a say in what's happening in Syria, for example? And he also says that the rebels are causing problems, that he kind of paints everybody in the same moral light, which is clearly not the case. You had Assad, who was responsible for the Hula massacre, where 200 women and children were slaughtered, some of them in their beds. And you're going to put them on the same moral grounding as the rebels that are defending that. And so I think the challenge is that Kofi Annan comes out with these unrealistic 6-point plans or whatnot. He goes around flying back and forth saying it's going to work. People sign on to it, just like North Korea. Everybody concedes, and then they get breathing room to kill more rebels, and then they come back and try again. So really, Assad is buying more time, and time is in his favor, not in the favor of the opposition.
So where do we go from here? What can and should we do next?
Well, the challenge is that the rebels really desperately need to get their act together. This has been something we've been saying for over a year now, and there's factions upon factions, and new factions start new coalitions, and there's no sense of who's in charge. And that's a big problem that's been faced by the friends of Syria that have been trying to back the opposition.
And no sign that they are getting their act together or are about to.
Yeah, well, I mean, every week there's another announcement about some new agreement, but tangibly on the ground it hasn't really translated to results. So that's the first question. You don't want a power vacuum happening, especially in Syria, where anybody could take power. We've seen what happens when that goes badly. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. After that, the United States needs to be a little bit more consistent in its approach to Syria in general. On one hand, we're saying we need to back the rebels. On one hand, we're frankly aiding other groups and arming the rebels. On the other, we're kind of just standing there politically saying, let's just have everybody talk it out, and here are the 6 points. But Assad, as much as he'll say, yeah, I sign on to it, there's no accountability there. He just says, I sign on, then he massacres somebody else down the road. What's the punishment for that?
Yeah, a couple of people weighing in on Kofi Annan here. Brian Conway says, Kofi Annan must be a late bloomer. He never accomplished anything while at the UN. I'm not sure he's accomplishing anything while in Syria, to be honest. I mean, when you see somebody like that, with this long experience as Secretary General of the United Nations, and he goes in there and he comes out with a deal, as you're saying, putting everybody on the same moral level. What is going on in that person's mind? I mean, to me, it seems impossible to get your head around how Kofi Annan sits there and says, oh, well, here's something that can work. I mean, how does that happen? And why does anybody take it seriously?
I think governments appreciate the appearance of progress. It makes everybody look good. And that's why we form committees or studies on things. The thing we have to remember is that when someone becomes elected as the UN Secretary General, they're not chosen for their principles or because they push and get things done. They're chosen because they never rock the boat. And that's why we see Ban Ki-moon now, who's really done very little that's outside of what everybody will agree on. And if everybody will agree on something, it's meaningless, judging from who's on the Security Council. And that's what Kofi Annan has been good at. And if you recall, in 1994, he oversaw the Rwandan genocide. And when I say oversaw, I mean because people were reporting to him that it was happening. They asked him to stop it, and he didn't do it. So these are things that we quickly forget in our 24-hour news cycles. He has a long history of incompetence and allowing massacres and atrocities to happen. And then he goes and shakes the hands of dictators and acts like everybody's equally complicit or not. We're all on the same page. Let's bring in Iran for some reason. And then now Russia is talking about hosting his own group. Iran has formed his own group of Syria kind of players, and he wants to host it in Russia now. So it's not helpful at all. And the fact that he's been appointed to begin with either shows appalling incompetence or that nobody wants real change to happen anyway.
So, crystal ball time, is Assad still in power in 3 months, 6 months?
Last year when we were here, we said, I hope next year, this time, he's not in power. I actually think he would be remaining in power. More and more people in his inner circle are defecting, but at the moment, the momentum is not on the opposition side. So I think we're going to see a stalemate for some time, and unfortunately more casualties happening. Sarah's
weighing in here. Is Annan making progress in Syria? Another good laugh. And Mike Carter asking, Annan in Syria, is there progress? Side question, who pays his salary? Who sets the salary? Who measures his success against established goals? And then answers his own question, I thought so. We're paying his salary, I guess, through our dues to the UN. I mean, the UN picks up at the tab
and
for
the United
all of this.
States pays up to a quarter of the bill for the United Nations. He's an envoy for the Arab League and the United Nations, which is kind of confusing. But as far as the accountability question, which I think is far more important, nothing holds them accountable, ever, which is why the United Nations is the way it is today.
All right. Adrian Hong, very interesting points. Managing Director of Pegasus Strategies. Good to see you as always, Adrian.